Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack one of the most massive and frankly consequential government policies in modern history. We are talking about China's one-child policy. We'll explore exactly how it was rolled out, the surprising exceptions that existed, and how it fundamentally reshaped an entire nation's demographic future. We've got a lot of incredible ground to cover, so let's dive right in.
Okay, let's start by picturing a really powerful metaphor for China's current crisis. Imagine a single worker, literally crushed under the weight of supporting 4 aging grandparents above him while also trying to care for a brand new baby below him. This is often called the 4-to-1 problem, and it beautifully, though tragically, captures the staggering demographic burden placed on young adults in China right now. But, how exactly did a nation of over 1 billion people end up with an inverted population pyramid like this?
Section 1. A looming population crisis. The pre-1979 context. Now, there's a pretty common myth out there that a blanket one-child policy just appeared out of thin air literally overnight. But the reality? It actually evolved gradually. Long before 1979, the government ran voluntary family planning programs. Why? Well, because the population was rapidly outgrowing its food supply, creating a very real existential threat. By the late 1970s, the state introduced a slogan, late, long, and few. Basically, they were encouraging later marriages, longer gaps between births, and just fewer children overall. At that time, the guideline was generally 2 kids for urban families and 3 for rural ones. It wasn't until 1979 that the official, stringent one-child policy era actually kicked off.
Section 2. The one-child policy rules, enforcement, and reality. State propaganda brilliantly illustrated the government's grand vision at the time. The promise was that sticking to a single-child family structure would directly lead to massive national economic growth, improved welfare for women and children, and ultimately much higher living standards for everyone. The message was loud and clear: sacrifice your family size for the wealth and health of the nation.
But contrasting that idealized, rosy picture, the reality on the ground was incredibly harsh. The enforcement procedures were strict. We're talking state-mandated intrauterine devices being implanted and obligatory family planning certificates that were heavily monitored. If you violated the rules, you faced devastating financial fines. And even more chillingly, there were actual monetary incentives, like better employment or higher wages, given to citizens just to spy on their neighbors and colleagues. Those who broke the rules faced severe social exclusion and the loss of vital government assistance.
Section 3. Arguments and exceptions. Weighing the costs.
So it's absolutely crucial that we weigh these perspectives impartially. On one side, the state argued this policy was essential for food security, for combating overpopulation, driving economic growth, and even securing environmental advantages by dropping the natural resource use per capita. But on the flip side, critics point to horrifying human rights violations, instances of infanticide, forced abortions, and the sheer immense pressure placed on that one single child to succeed. Plus, a lot of economists argue that the economy likely would have grown anyway, and the policy really just accelerated a shrinking workforce.
Also, and this is super important to remember, the policy was never a 100% blanket rule for everyone across the board. There were notable, specific allowances. The strict one-child rule applied mostly to the Han Chinese majority. But, as an example, if both parents were themselves only children, they could actually have a second child. Exceptions were also made if a first child was handicapped or unable to work due to non-hereditary diseases. Remarried couples had certain allowances too, as did folks who suffered from false infertility diagnoses.
Section 4. The demographic fallout. Unintended consequences.
Let's look at the tragic irony here. This was a government policy that worked so ruthlessly well, it essentially engineered a completely new, incredibly complex national crisis. In China, early retirement ages, traditionally 55 for women and 60 for men, mean that elders receive very little state aid. Because of this, parents historically relied heavily on their sons to secure elderly care, since a wife traditionally joins her husband's family. Under a strict one-child limit, this preference for sons became a literal matter of survival. Tragically, this resulted in countless girls being abandoned, put up for adoption, or just hidden away from the authorities. Today, that has created an entire class of millions of unregistered citizens who completely lack access to basic healthcare and education.
Section 5. China's gender imbalance, a skewed society.
The sheer scale of this fallout is absolutely staggering. 30 million. Because of the policies and cultural pressures we just talked about, there are currently 30 million more men than women in China today. The ratio sits around 113 males for every 100 females. That officially makes China the most gender-imbalanced country in the entire world.
This massive imbalance created a really fascinating, yet difficult, societal phenomenon known as bare branches. The marriage market became wildly skewed, with huge crowds of men trying to court a single woman. These bare branches are millions of men, particularly concentrated in rural regions, who are mathematically locked out of ever finding a partner, simply because there just aren't enough women in the population.
But on the flip side, the pressure on women is equally intense, just in a totally different way. Society and even authorities often blame women for this marriage gap, accusing them of having expectations that are too high. In fact, career-focused women who refuse to marry early and choose to focus on their professions are often officially and derogatorily labeled as leftover women.
Section 6. Reversing the rules. Trying to fix the balance.
Realizing the massive economic shrinking and the societal cliff they were rapidly approaching, the Chinese government had to make a drastic pivot. In a complete, kind of jarring reversal from the strict rules of the past, 2015 saw the government suddenly shifting its messaging to essentially say, please have 2 children. But the state was still pretty cautious, fearing a sudden baby boom that would strain resources in the opposite direction. But the reality? The culture had already fundamentally shifted. Between 2015 and 2016, there was only a really modest year-on-year increase of about 1 million births. Turns out, you can't just flip a demographic switch overnight.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder. What are the long-term societal pressures when a state drastically mandates family planning? When you consider the crushing pressure on individuals trying to balance aging elders, demanding careers, and navigating strict state rules, how do we actually weigh the impacts of sweeping government interventions on the most intimate, personal parts of human life? It's a heavy question, and it's one that China, and honestly the rest of the world, will be grappling with for generations to come. Thank you so much for exploring this topic with me today.